Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Wednesday, November 10th, 2021. And happy birthday to my stepdad. I don't know if you're listening this morning, but maybe my mom is. Happy birthday, Bert. So thanks for I don't know what. What do we thank? Do I thank him for his birthday? Thanks for being a great stepdad. How about that? That's nice. I can always do that. And we'll give you a call and wish you happy birthday. I just thought it would be nice, and perhaps maybe Mark's listening too. He might like to hear it. I don't want to skip it. And thanks. How about this? Thanks to my phone for reminding me of all these great things so that I can say nice things about you when it's your birthday. So happy birthday. That's not on everybody else's agenda necessarily, but I'm sure they all wish you happy birthday as well. What is on the agenda today? Well, no one's been tweeting about that, so we can't use that excuse necessarily. But Greg's been putting together his raft of stories. That's not included in there, but I didn't alert Greg to this. But now I'm sure it'll be added. Lots to catch up on, of course. More subpoenas issued yesterday by the January 6th committee. No response to the previous batch of subpoenas, but more subpoenas nonetheless. And all sorts of interesting news. Also growing out of January 6th, a lot of Twitter discussion over what I guess is an as yet unverified report. I don't know where it's coming from exactly, but it seems to have originated with a very popular Twitter personage who you may know or follow online as Mueller, she wrote, like murder, she wrote, but Mueller. But remember Mueller? Remember when he was going to do something and it was like a real serious investigation and all that? Yeah. Well, I guess she's stuck with the handle. So, oh well, that seems obsolete. But anyway, she's got one of the more explosive stories. But I got to tell you, I mean, I've followed for a while, but this is, I mean, well, you know, when it's a one person and they have an exclusive with a bombshell story, and it's not getting published anywhere that has like a legal department and fact checkers and vetting, you know, I worry about it a little bit. But perfectly plausible story for the most part, although I guess where it gets really wild, I'm just going to throw it out there. It happens to be, I'm sure you've seen it if you've logged on this morning and stopped by, I don't know, Daily Kos perhaps, might be a good place to start your day. On the top of the list of trending diaries is the diary of Private Jarhead, who carries this news forward into the blogosphere for us. And the basics of this one, of course you will recall all of the reporting from sources that do have legal departments saying that crowds were chanting at January 6th, hang Mike Pence. So we know there was that going on. We also may recall the stories from some of the places that have fact checkers and legal departments, but from which the reporters withheld much of the information so that they could publish it in a book. And one of those books, which has its own legal department and fact checkers, told us the story of Mike Pence being reluctant, say, to get into the armored limo that comes with the job of vice president and leave the Capitol complex when, I guess, he was offered the chance to escape in the armored vehicle, but his personal Secret Service detail maybe wasn't coming along, and he got that weird Godfather-ish feeling, like, you want me to get in the car in the middle of an insurrection where people are trying to hang me, but you're not getting in with me? That gives me a weird feeling. I don't think I want to go. Well, anyway, this news story is, as Mueller, she wrote, puts it. And by the way, in case you were wondering and wanted to have a more identifiable or more regular street name to refer to the author, it's Allison Gill is, I guess, the name of the person behind this account, who has her own podcast and will no doubt explain some of this in depth on that podcast. But I don't know when that happens. But here's the deal, as she reports it. Pence, his aides, and staff were locked out of their offices in the Capitol complex during the insurrection. You will recall, of course, that the vice president is president of the Senate. So, yes, he does, in fact, maintain a suite of offices on the Senate side of the building, I am sure. But he was locked out of those offices, which are no doubt secure and would have been a good place to go and hide during the insurrection, because their access badges had been deactivated the morning of the attack, allegedly, according to sources familiar with this incident. This will no doubt bring to mind for you the complaints we heard a lot about in the early going, but since have heard next to nothing about various members of Congress, Democratic women of color in most cases, saying that the panic buttons installed recently in their offices, everyone's offices, in case of some sort of incident like, an insurrection, had been themselves deactivated or turned off, or in some cases removed entirely, torn out of the wall. And I don't think we ever did get to the bottom of that, but this would comport with that. According to one source, Mueller, she wrote, continues, who spoke on the condition of anonymity, Pence's team huddled in a loading dock, unable to access their offices, and started planning contingencies for a constitutional crisis, which I guess was already underway. They didn't have to plan for the constitutional crisis. They were planning what to do about it, you see. He had rejected planning the constitutional crisis. Anyway, started planning contingencies for a constitutional crisis and how to remove the president who would be removed from office because his term ended in a couple of days, but you never know what he's going to do in the meantime. That's what it says. It goes on to say that the access badges worked that morning before the mob entered the Capitol, but once Pence was removed from the chamber floor, their badges no longer worked. Access was restored later that night after the threat was over. So, shocking revelation, the sort of shocking revelation that you would like to make sure is a true revelation before you carry it too far, but people are talking. And you know how it is when you're dealing with Trump things. Many people are saying this. I don't know anything about it. I'm just saying that's what people are saying. And I think now you can say pretty much whatever you want, which would be a great transition to Greg's report. Good morning, Greg. You can say whatever you want. The floor is yours. And all the space above it if you want, too. You don't have to lay down on it or anything.
Well, the important thing is the space below, which is the loading dock in the underground parking lot. And why is that relevant? I don't have one in my house, but there is one in the Capitol. And a lot of this discussion about what you were just talking about comes from Jonathan Karl's new book. Because, all the journalists that knew what was going on who decided to make money and not tell you are trying to get rich on their books. Yes. And they want you to read it. So he had an interview on Stephen Colbert.
Okay.
And said, when I was writing my book, I was trying to get information about what was going on January 6th.
Yeah, I was too. That's funny.
Part of what I saw and got access to were official White House photographs paid for by the taxpayers of Mike Pence on that day, at that time, in a loading dock in an underground parking garage beneath the Capitol complex, Karl said. No place to sit, no desk, no chairs, no nothing. He was in this concrete parking garage. And one photo shows Pence reacting to a tweet from Donald Trump attacking him in the middle of the siege. You can see it kind of looks like Pence is grimacing. Karl asked Pence if he could publish the pictures, and Pence blocked the release. And so, why was Pence in the Capitol complex loading dock?
Yeah, why was a photographer there?
And then that's where somebody, I have an unnamed source who says, he couldn't get into the offices because they were blocked. That's why he was in the loading dock.
Okay.
Now, is that verified? No, but that's the stuff that's floating around.
That is floating. People are saying they want to float it, and I'm saying it floats. That's it. I mean, I don't know.
It would be irresponsible not to, speculate.
It would be. I mean, it's sitting at the top of the recommended list, and at the minimum, we say, all right, well, be careful with it. Couch it.
Well,
in
the main
terms.
thing is, okay, the story came up. Let's be aware of the story on our radar now. Let's see what comes of it.
Yeah, why not?
Because
Let's hope it's
if
true.
Jonathan Karl could get access to the pictures, then presumably the January 6th committee could too.
I don't know. That seems difficult. Yesterday I learned all about people who were threatening public officials. The cops said, we can't find them. Their numbers are untraceable. But the reporters called the numbers and found the people. So you never know what people are able to access. Those reporters are very enterprising. Maybe Jonathan Karl has superpowers.
Maybe. So the Reuters report that leads up my pundit roundup this morning is Reuters unmasked Trump supporters terrifying U.S. election officials. But they don't mean the word terrifying. They mean terrorizing.
Oh, okay. Because the officials aren't terrifying.
Because, that sounds bad.
Yeah, you can't use that because that sounds like the other T word that is only for brown people.
So Jamie Dupre, and unfortunately it's paywall stuff. It's regular order. His Substack that I subscribe to.
He should give me
has this nice summary of some of the things that happened. Trump loses in court over documents in the Capitol attack investigation, because the Capitol attack investigation very much in the news.
Yes, loading dock and all.
Democrats demand an ethics and criminal probe of Representative Gosar from Arizona.
Let's go, Sar.
And Donald Trump tries to rewrite history on infrastructure, saying I could have passed it, except when given the chance, he walked away.
Yes, that's true. I've been being reminded over the past couple of days of Pelosi and Schumer walking into the White House and saying we could do a $2 trillion infrastructure bill right now. We're okay with it.
I'm mad at you because whatever.
Yeah, so we've got to make great deals unless we don't have to make them or can't make them.
So the federal judge story is kind of interesting. A federal judge last night rejected Donald Trump's legal effort to block the National Archives from handing over documents requested by the January 6th committee. And because the fight over who will and won't respond to subpoenas and how long that takes, getting the documents seems a much more straightforward way of figuring out what was going on. Clearing the way for panel to get access to those materials in their investigation, and the deadline is Friday, ruling in a 39-page opinion. Federal Judge Tanya Chutkan said former President Trump has made no showing of imminent irreparable harm to any interest protected by executive privilege that compels an immediate halt to compliance. He, Trump, retains the right to assert his records of privilege, but the incumbent president is not constitutionally obligated to honor that assertion.
Yeah, it's like the former president is a parliamentarian.
Right, but at the same time,
like the archivist.
I think some of the commentary doesn't deal with this enough. Tanya Chutkan said, the judge said, presidents are not kings, and plaintiff is not president.
That's like 2 steps removed from being able to get this done.
Yes, but if you step back and think about it and look at the big picture, that's capitalized. I don't know if you can tell that on the internets and radio.
BP.
Right? Big picture. The through line from the Trump claims is that he's still president.
That's what he thinks.
Yes.
Right.
And so, therefore, it's logical to say I still have executive privilege because I should still be president. And that's unstated and perhaps understated. But it's really underlying the whole, theory of the case, as lawyers like to say, and I'm not one.
Yeah, well, that's I would leave that unstated too. That was probably his lawyer's advice. Don't state it.
Right.
It's kind of crazy. Interesting. All right. Well, yeah, I'll have to look into this. I saw early reports of his failure with the court yesterday and read in passing. It sounded like, I don't know whether it was a separate ruling or the same ruling, that some of the lawyers were laughing because he had filed a notice of like an immediate appeal,
right.
And the
same
judge was like,
same
you
case
have to lose
before.
first. Okay.
So what happens is Trump looks at how the discussion went and said, I'm going to lose.
Yes.
So he immediately files an appeal. Again, I'm not a lawyer, so somebody who is can actually explain this better than me. But Trump's lawyers figure they're going to lose.
Yes.
So they file, in effect, a please stay this order.
Yes.
And the judge said, I can't stay the order.
Right.
I haven't ordered anything yet.
Yeah. I
that
mean,
happened like in the middle of the night.
You got it.
And within 2 hours of Trump filing at like midnight, the judge said, this is stupid. You can't ask me to stay an order that hasn't been issued yet. You have to wait for it to be issued.
Yes.
Then you can ask that.
Right.
So you can't do that. Then the next morning, she said, I understand everybody's really anxious for this, so let me tell you what happens. You lose.
I order that you lose. Yes. Now he can file the appeal, but
now he can file the appeal.
Anticipatory,
but he didn't do a stay. He filed an appeal, and that goes to the Court of Appeals, I guess.
That's where
and the panel who's going to decide that includes Nathalie Rao.
Why not? Who?
The Trumper nutty judge.
Oh, all right, great.
Plus 2 others. And if he wins there, and I don't think he would, but if he does, then that goes on bank to the whole
it might
Court of Appeals.
It could,
and then after that, it goes to the Supreme Court.
Sure, they could go direct to the Supreme Court,
but they have to do all of that in a couple of days.
Well,
because the deadline's Friday, and today's Wednesday.
Yeah, well, he moves so quickly. Trump is
so again the underlying "I'm still president" theme is going to be really interesting to see what Rao writes.
Yeah,
he may be overruled 2-1, but still, it would be very interesting if that happened.
We'll find out how cuckoo she really is.
Anyway, get a real lawyer to tell you what happened. That's my summary-based reading on the reporters who cover the courts.
That appears to be, correct. Look, you can't appeal an order that hasn't been issued, and I know you think you're going to lose, but I guess it would be like showing up for chemotherapy the day before you got your diagnosis. You're probably right. All the signs point to cancer, but let the doctor tell you maybe what kind, or maybe you don't have it. But
before you start taking your ivermectin, why don't you find out what you have first?
Yeah. Well,
for
ivermectin you can just eat as a snack for whatever reason. I think that's
just have some peach bits while you're waiting. So January 6th, the ruling came as the House panel investigating issued more subpoenas on Tuesday, targeting a series of ex-White House officials looking for information on what Trump and his aides did to stop the counting of electoral votes by the Congress. 10 Trump aides now face subpoenas, including Kayleigh McEnany, known liar, and White House advisor Stephen Miller, known white supremacist.
Yeah.
Right. The committee noted both spread false information about vote fraud in 2020. You can see the full list of subpoenas at the link that Jamie Dupree provides. Yes. And this is a second set of subpoenas to go out to people with close ties to Trump in recent days. The 16 individuals we've subpoenaed this week, said Benny Thompson, chair of the panel, have knowledge as to what occurred before January 6th as well as what occurred on January 6th. It's a relevant statement because one of the things that's in this whole suit about turning over documents from the National Archives is the committee says they not only want to know what happened on January 6th, they also want to know what happened before that set everything up. And the Trump people said, well, that's too broad. And the judge in ruling, and I didn't read the 36, 37-page thing, just the results.
I'll do it.
But when she was discussing, she said something along the lines of, or at least during the questioning, when she was questioning the National Archives and committee lawyers, isn't this overly broad? You're asking for a lot of stuff. And they said, well, we need to know what the mindset was going into this, and that's why we need all this information. And she said, well, you're not entitled to overly broad fishing expeditions. And they said, no, it's relevant. And she apparently decided they were right.
Oh, well, all right, good.
Because I didn't see anything in there, at least in the reported snippets of the 36, 37-page thing that said, overly broad things we won't do, but we will do this. All she said is, yeah, you can have it.
Okay. I mean, I see what they mean, that it would feed into one thing or another, just like the unspoken part of his appeal that he believes he's still president. If you can find memos or emails somewhere that say, you'll be entitled to do this even after January 20th because you're the real president, that would be important.
So that leads me to this Axios piece, which is Trump's never-ending legal losing streak. The latest, it turns out it's not okay to use the White House as the stage for Republican National Convention when he used the White House to do a citizenship ceremony.
Yes, and many other things, but I remember that one.
A top watchdog found that 13 senior Trump officials, including Mike Pompeo, violated ethics laws and helped create a taxpayer-funded campaign apparatus within the upper echelons of the executive branch. And that's in addition to the federal judge rejecting Trump's request to block the National Archives that we were just talking about, then the committee subpoenas that we were just talking about, and then the grand jury in New York statewide,
yes.
which is criminally investigating Trump organization, ran out after 6 months, so they appointed another one so they can keep going. So now they have another 6 months to do it. And an Atlanta district attorney is moving toward convening her own grand jury in an investigation of Trump's attempts to overturn the election in Georgia. So all of those things are happening at the same time. And so Trump's in a world of legal trouble. And yes, it moves slowly, but it's really interesting that, all of these things are happening like, okay, here's like 24 hours worth of news about what's going on here. Well, that's a lot.
All of it about indicting the former president. Okay.
It takes a while, but, there it is.
Well, it'll be great if it happens, but boy, it's hard to wait. What
sure,
can you do?
But these things do take time, and then, you do want to build your case and so on and so on and so on.
Would like them
now,
to win.
In addition to that,
yes,
not instead of, but in addition to all of that, angered by an animated video from Paul Gosar, which depicted him killing Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi on Tuesday called for criminal and ethics investigation into the Arizona Republican.
Okay, a criminal one. Why not?
And Kevin McCarthy had nothing to say. Absolutely nothing to say. I tell you what he said, but he didn't say anything. Gosar, in a statement, denied the video was a threat, but despite his defense, he deleted the tweet.
Well, finally. Jeez.
But that raises another question.
Okay.
Okay. First of all, Brian Klaas notes there's two reasons why it's only the former Republicans who are condemning Gosar's incitement. One is the sane anti-extremist Republicans were largely purged, and two, current ones know in many either warp-based like violent extremist rhetoric and imagery. So for that reason, they're not really doing anything about it. I didn't see it, I never read that. But
yes.
At the same time, Tim Mack has a book coming out, which is about the NRA.
Yes.
And he was really giving a PR interview about that book. And he says a secret tape made after Columbine shows the NRA's evolution on school shootings. Over 2.5 hours, they laid out the playbook of the NRA for mass shootings over the next 20 plus years. I have the secret tapes, he says. And basically what the NRA decided to do is it looked bad, but we can't back down. So between that and Sandy Hook, they decided we're going to just double down. That you need a good guy with a gun to take on a bad guy. We are not backing down. It would make us look guilty, in effect, is what they're saying. So according to the NRA, if you take down tweets advocating that you should kill another representative in the House, if you take that down, well, that's admission of guilt.
But,
because the NRA's approach is no, you never back down.
Well, that's Trump's approach, too.
Trumpy, but the NRA was doing it first.
Yeah, but the NRA doesn't care about Gosar's video because he used swords.
Well, but the point there, because he put his head on an anime thing that already existed. But the point is that, Gosar is actually in a bit of trouble. Again, like all things, we'll have to see if anybody actually ever gets taken into account and held responsible. But he's not winning the public relations battle on this one.
No, it doesn't seem to be the case. Even McCarthy can't even. You would think he'd just put out a pat defense of him, but he doesn't. Right,
and then the background for that, the threats aren't just one party against another. One of the 13 House Republicans who voted last week for a bipartisan infrastructure bill, Fred Upton, in Michigan, detailed on Tuesday some of the personal threats he's received since casting the vote. Upton says his office has been deluged with angry calls about his vote to build more roads and bridges.
Yeah, don't do that. Right,
so,
he's getting threatened.
Why? Because, he voted with Democrats. Yes. And they're threatening people who are in swing districts that Republicans can lose. Right. So, one of the things that you wonder about, and remember the Senator Aiken that didn't exist? Because he ran against Claire McCaskill and lost before Republican wave, was cresting.
Right.
Republicans are perfectly capable of stepping on their own best chances to win.
That is true.
And attacking the 13 who voted for roads and bridges in their districts is not necessarily the best way to win the House.
Yeah. Well, a district that's been represented for some time, anyway, if not a long time, by a very moderate Republican member. They might be able to primary them out, but if you nominate a kook in a place that's used to moderate Republicans, you might not win.
Wait, but it's not just that. So in Punch Bowl, House GOP leadership is bracing for a movement, and I have this tweet in the pundit roundup. House GOP leadership is bracing for a movement to strip lawmakers who voted for infrastructure of their committee slots.
Right. Sure.
Like John Katko and Brian Fitzpatrick. And in the Philadelphia Inquirer, political reporter Jonathan Tamari, who I follow on Twitter, says, so Brian Fitzpatrick is the only House Republican still standing in suburban Philadelphia. He keeps winning in a really competitive district, and his colleagues want to totally strip him of influence and power.
They should do it.
Which would, in effect, kick him out of the party.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Now the backstory there is that as this bill was getting ready for a vote, the plan amongst Republicans was to let the Democrats get to 218, which would be a win. Yeah. Then the Republicans would vote for it.
Yeah,
nobody would remember that, and then they could say, well, we didn't put him over the top. And by the way, I get credit, and I'm going to make campaign commercials about how I deliver to my constituency. That got blown up because Jim Banks from Indiana, Republican, who got prevented from being on the January 6th committee because he's a jerk, Jim Banks was on television talking about the infrastructure bill and how awful it was that his colleagues would vote for it. And that got John Katko and others angry, so they voted for it early and put the bill over the top. And that's what this inter-party fight is all about. Timing, not vote, but the timing of the vote.
Okay.
Because, and we talked about this on the show before, it's taken me forever to truly understand this. But so much of what happens, especially in the House and the Senate, is about face saving.
True, yes. And I guess
So it made them look bad. So everybody's mad at everybody else, and now they're going to, destroy some people's careers because you made me look bad.
All right. Well, as long as the careers being destroyed are Republican careers, I guess I can't get in the way. It's not up to me.
Republicans in disarray. What can I tell you? We'll talk more about it after the break.
Okay. Well, I think it's a really great idea. Let them go ahead and strip them of their committee assignments. Perhaps if we do talk about it some more, we can talk about what that means and what we should do.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I have no idea what we talked about during the break. I remember nothing. And I regret it all. Okay.
But I want to know, so what happens next if the Republicans actually start to get really antsy about these guys being on committee? Because I hate to say it, they voted with Democrats.
Yuck. Well, you know how the Q people feel about Democrats. You can understand why they'd feel so bad about this. Good question, Greg. I'm glad you asked. Do it like a commercial. But we were chatting during the break about it, and well, removing people from a committee slot is not usually a controversial thing and not often a difficult thing to accomplish. Like if you wanted to remove Paul Gosar from his committee slots, you could get that done pretty quick.
Well, but there's two ways to do it. Either the Republicans do it or the Democrats do it.
Well, to really get them off the committee. Remember that everybody who sits on a committee sits there by virtue of there having been adopted a resolution by majority vote on the House floor naming them to the committee. And ordinarily, in the normal course of things, Democrats allow Republicans to name whoever they want to their allotted number of slots and vice versa. And everybody just votes for everybody's resolutions and says, sure, no problem, or they pass them by voice vote. But the first step in removing Republicans from their committee slots because Republicans are angry with them would be for the Republican conference to vote to do something like this. The second step would be for them to then embody that result, their own internal results, in a resolution and bring it to the floor, for which they would need to garner a majority vote. And ordinarily they could count on, assistance with that from the Democrats. The Democrats,
and that's how Marjorie Taylor Greene got kicked off?
Well, actually, they didn't do it. Republicans refused to start the process, so Democrats said, well, remember that ultimately this is a matter of a majority vote on the floor. So ordinarily we would leave this to the Republicans, but they refused to do it. So the other way to do it is for a majority on the House floor from whatever party. We're not saying it has to be Democrats or Republicans. We're just bringing this resolution that says, Marjorie Taylor Greene, you're out. And whoever votes for it, votes for it. Hey, look at that. It was all Democrats. What do you know? And as it happens, that constitutes a majority of the House. Republicans, who usually have first say in this, had no say in this. What do you know? But it still works. Republicans could come to the House floor with a resolution removing these people. Democrats could, if they wanted to, say, these are good, solid, moderate Republicans that we're happy to work with. We refuse to vote for the resolution, and it fails. Or, better solution, well, we'll get out of your way. You don't want these people on the committee? That's up to you. We don't vote, or we do vote, or we let it go through on voice vote. And then those people at that point would be removed from the committee, at which point there would be X number of slots on X number of committees now empty. At which point I assume the Republicans would say, well, instead of moderates like Fred Upton on whatever committee he's on, I nominate, well, you know how they do their things, right? Jim Jordan is going to take his slot. Jim Jordan's going to be on every committee from now on. But you have to bring a resolution that says Jim Jordan is now named to this committee, and that has to pass.
So again, if the Republicans essentially want to remove Fred Upton and Fitzpatrick and some of the other people, they would have to send it to the House, and the House would have to vote that they do. Now, if that vote fails,
then
among the many ways that a vote can fail, from being tabled to rules to actual vote on the floor, whatever it is, then the Republicans cannot remove them?
Right. They're there. They're stuck. They're stuck. They're still there. Now, the Republicans could kick those people out of the Republican conference.
Well, that's the next step, you see.
It could be.
The point is to threaten to do that, knowing that you don't have the votes to actually take them off committee, is in effect a threat to kick them out of the party.
Yes, that's definitely true. That's an important part of it. And I mean, that's what they're telling them. We're basically getting ready to kick you out of the party. All the benefits of being a member of the Republican conference are being revoked from you.
And then what? They're still in Congress.
Well,
You can't kick them out of Congress.
No, they can't.
They become Steve King sitting on the sidelines doing nothing.
So now they are, that's the way he did. But if they lose the vote on the floor, then they've kicked them out of the party, but left them on the committee as independents. So then I guess they sit there and say, well, I'm an independent now, I guess, and I vote however I want, but I'm still on the committee. And now at that point, Republicans will realize, hey, it's a very closely divided House. I should have, let's say, if there are, 15 Democrats on this committee, there's probably 14 or 13 Republicans on this committee too. I've just tried to remove 2 or 3 of them. Another option available to Democrats, of course, is to say, if you want those people off the committee, they're off the committee. That's fine. And we'll even let it go through. And you would remove those 2 Republicans, but there's nobody in their place, not automatically. The Republicans would have to also bring a resolution, and it wouldn't have to be separate, I don't think. You could do it in the same resolution and say, we want to put Jim Jordan in this person's place, to which Democrats at that point say, well, that one I won't help you with. No. You remove 2 people from the Ways and Means Committee. That gives us a 2-vote advantage on the panel, and I'm not going to help you replace them. How's that? Are you sure?
So that resolution that combines both those things is Democrats saying, okay, either you remove them and not replace them, or we won't vote for this thing at all because you want Jim Jordan on it. We won't do that. So therefore, you can't remove them.
It could certainly go that way. Yeah, so I say let them go ahead and remove them. And then, just say,
so again, the
when
threat
it comes to
isn't
replacing
to take them off committee. The threat is to throw them out of the party. And that's really what's underlying this. And that's why the whole thing is so weird.
Yeah, and they could end up removed. They just won't end up replaced, or they shouldn't.
But who doesn't get thrown out of the party? Paul Gosar. It's okay to threaten the life of somebody, but my goodness, voting with the Democrats, that's enough to get you thrown out of the party.
Yes.
That ought to be made fairly clear.
Right. Well, the Democrats can do what they did there with Marjorie Taylor Greene and say we put it to the Republicans to voluntarily remove him, and if they don't, we'll remove him because, again, these decisions are made by a majority of the House, and we have that, and we're angry with you. So they can kick him off. They could do a favor for Republicans and kick off the people who voted for infrastructure, but I don't know why they would do that unless it was to say, fine, handicap yourself on every committee. That's great. No problem.
Right. Anyway, so that's basically the background for what's going on today. A whole lot of stuff swirling around, none of it good for Republicans or Trump. And just thought I would mention that. So let's get a little retro here and talk about some of the issues that have come up over the last 5-6 days to finally put a stake in them so we can not talk about them again.
Okay.
This one is from the always excellent Sarah Binder. 3 reasons Congress finally passed an infrastructure bill and what happened to Build Back Better. And basically her summary is what led the House to pass the infrastructure bill at last, cocktail of election surprises, lawmakers trying to avoid blame, and vexing Senate budget rules. So pretty much our analysis. Okay. First of all, leaders exploited the results to press forward. Democrats had been making progress, but the Democrats' electoral drubbing probably helped Pelosi and Biden wear down liberals' reluctance to pass the thing, and also to pressure moderates to commit to supporting Build Back Better. After struggling to secure a majority for both votes, Pelosi on Friday remarked that she held her speaker's secret whip count. Liberals who promised to vote for the BIF, Bilateral Infrastructure BFD, if Pelosi needed their votes. From the final vote, it looked as if Pelosi needed 3 Republican votes to pass the bill. She got 13.
Right.
But it's possible Pelosi had 3 of what political scientists call if you need me pledges in her hip pocket. Once those Democrats saw the votes weren't needed, they joined 3 other Democrats in opposing the bill. Always possible. Representatives like Jamal Bowman are getting a lot of pushback from their constituents that you should have voted for this. So it doesn't always work out the way the people holding out wanted to. So in the end, it passed. Nobody's going to remember that. I don't think it's going to be mostly no harm, no foul. But, sloppy, but a win. Yeah. But at the same time, it was the speaker doing the speaker prerogative of here's how many votes I have. I'm an excellent vote counter, one of the best ever. And you 3 can vote however you want.
Right. If you need to, you can do it. I got it.
I don't need you. I got these.
I don't think it's a great
guys
idea.
over here. I got the problem-solving caucus.
Yeah.
And guess what? If we take their votes and not yours, you get away with a vote, and they get thrown out of their party. So win-win for me.
Right. Collect as many as you can.
Yeah, exactly. So that worked out okay for Pelosi. Next, blame-avoiding lawmakers, she says. Why the change in tactics? Many argued that liberals were ready to take a leap to trust the moderate colleagues, but more likely, liberals were feeling the heat from party leaders and the president. It's long time past. Shifting blame to moderates for dragging their feet probably looked better than being blamed for blocking a popular bipartisan priority.
Yeah, okay.
That makes sense. And third, the Byrd rule. Okay. You can't pre-negotiate what the Senate's going to do when the Senate is the Senate. So all told, it's no surprise liberals gave in. But even with Infrastructure Week behind us, potholes await. So I think we did a pretty good summary of all of that. I don't think there's anything in there that we didn't cover when we were trying to dissect exactly what was going on with the bill. So I think we did a pretty good job.
Okay.
Hey, anytime Sarah Binder agrees with us, me. Right. Then I think, okay, I did all right.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, we were on the right page, certainly.
Now, about Virginia, because that was that election that drove the Democrats to suddenly focus, shall we say. Not necessarily change your opinion or change your approach, but focus. So Judd Legum points out 2 things that political pundits will not tell you. 1, nobody knows exactly what drives the outcome of any particular election. And number 2, even if you could figure it out, Every election is different from another one, so it doesn't necessarily hold.
Okay. Well,
your TV and Twitter is filled with people who claim to know exactly what went wrong in the last election and what to do to win the next one. And I promise you, they have no idea what they're talking about. So I'm going to take that in mind and give you some feedback that's come out since our last show on Virginia in particular and the school issue.
All right. It's wrong, but go ahead.
Okay. Axios Ipsos. No widespread COVID school backlash around the country.
All right.
How good of a job are local schools doing in balancing health and safety with other priorities? Overall, somewhat good 55%. Very good 16%. So like 3/4 of the country think their own school systems are doing okay. So if you're looking for a school backlash, you're not going to find it.
Maybe this is like, how do you like Congress as a whole? Terrible.
Exactly.
How do you
it's
like
terrible,
your
but my own, fine.
Yeah.
So what happened in Virginia may or may not have anything to do with what happens elsewhere.
Okay.
Our findings from national surveys suggest Americans are less worried about COVID risks and largely feel the Delta variant is behind them, and that's a potential path for redemption for Biden. And why it matters, Republicans are weaponizing dissatisfaction, but when it comes to COVID issues specifically, the survey finds discontent is being driven by a vocal but small minority. Fewer than 1 in 10 parents said schools have done a very poor job.
Okay, yeah, they're vocal, all right.
Right? It's a tail wagging the dog scenario. Most parents are okay with how the schools handle the pandemic. So, don't worry that, oh my gosh, this means the country's collapsing and everybody agrees with Chris Rufo, the CRT guy, who's pushing it for the Republicans. No, not necessarily.
Right.
But Virginia is special in a lot of ways.
Thank you.
My contention, because everybody on Twitter is correct, right? And I said this early on, is that Terry McAuliffe wasn't a good candidate. He put his foot in his mouth and basically told parents they have no business getting involved in the schools. And that's not what he said, but that's how it was played. And that part worked because it got people annoyed because they were already annoyed. And so Danny Barefoot, who's a Democrat, did a focus group. And today I'm facilitating a focus group of suburban women in Virginia. These women all voted for Northam in 2017, Biden in 2020, and Youngkin last week. Right? So they're not all committed, Trumpers.
They ought to be. Right. Okay.
They came from all over the Commonwealth, 50% from Nova, 20% from Hampton Roads, 15% from Richmond, 15% from other parts of the Commonwealth. Not the state, the Commonwealth. Right? The focus group is, unsurprisingly, more white than the Commonwealth, 79%, 11% are black, 6% Latino, 4% Asian. But even though the demos here are pretty white, important to note they're not Trump crazies. We're starting out with some temperature checks. Okay. 64% disapprove of Biden, 86% don't want Trump to run again, 79% agree with the statement Trump's a racist.
Okay.
So McAuliffe's message got through.
Well, that's nice.
Right? But we started out by asking what the most pressing issue is. You want to guess? Or did you already read it?
I don't know. Let me read. Hold on. Okay. I don't know. I guess they would have said, I thought they were brought there so that they would say education and school.
And that's not what they said. They said gas prices.
That's amazing. See, that's wrong.
Right. We asked who here would describe gas prices as negatively impacting their finances. 76% said yes.
Sure. I mean,
and that brought them to inflation. The black woman said her grocery bills have doubled. No way to fact check that. 70% of participants say the grocery bills have gone up significantly. Okay. We asked who agrees that Youngkin is very similar or somewhat similar to Trump. Nobody agreed. McAuliffe's attacks totally fell flat here. So you look at that and you say, look, you could still say Trump is awful, and you could say Republicans are the party that facilitates him, but you can't say Youngkin is Trump. That's not going to work. It didn't work. Okay.
Well, all right.
Now on to school curriculum. These should be fun. 90% of women say they trust Youngkin more in education. How much input should parents have into their children's school curriculum? 51% said a lot, and 24% said a fair amount, and that's where McAuliffe lost them.
An unfair amount. We should go with that. Yeah,
right? 17% a little, and 8% none. And Danny Barefoot says McAuliffe's gaffe just devastating here. One of the Latino women speaks up and says they asked us to do all this work for months, and then he says it's none of our business. And another woman from Fairfax speaks up on teachers' union. They'd keep schools closed forever if they could. They'd keep our kids online until the 7th booster.
I doubt it. But
right? We asked, should schools have been closed? Yes, 14%. Yes, but they closed for too long, 51%. No, they should have never closed, 35%. Again, that's a strictly Virginia issue, and not everywhere in Virginia were the schools closed either.
True.
Democrats very likely screwed up on the politics of school closures, and to get a better sense of where these women are, other than school closures, how do you feel about COVID closures and restrictions in Virginia? 63% about right. 18% went on for too long, and 19% they went on for way too long. Mm-hmm. So most people are okay with COVID in general in terms of how Northam and the state handled it. They're still upset about the schools. So Barefoot says these women are not anti-COVID nuts. Disapproval of COVID regs mostly comes down to schools. Now on to critical race theory. We asked if anybody here knows what it is, and one woman said, well, it teaches the kids America is defined by the worst parts of its past.
That's it. You got it. Good job.
Right? And one of the black women speaks up and says, our kids should be taught about slavery and all the awfulness, but America is also a good country, and that's what I want my kids to learn.
That's it. That's right. That's the correct one.
So we asked people what their view is. 62% have an unfavorable view of CRT, 11% favorable, and 27% don't know enough. It really should be 80% don't know enough, but that's the way it is.
Right.
We asked, is critical race theory being taught? 27% said yes, 25% said no, 48% said unsure. Mm-hmm. One woman says CRT may not be included in the school, but some of the worst ideas are slipping it in. What's your opinion of America? 77% good country, 9% bad country. Every person of color said good. Yeah, we asked, do you think Democrats share your values? Well, they fight for the right things, and I usually vote for them, but they believe in crazy things, and sometimes I feel like I don't know if the right words for things. If I don't use them, they think I'm a bigot.
Okay.
That's the part about, the whole David Shore got to figure out how to talk to the rurals. Right? You don't call them a bigot, even if they're a bigot. It doesn't mean that you are okay with bigotry. You just have to figure out how to talk to them.
Right. Well, although I will say sometimes people think they're being called bigots, and that's not happening. But they say, but you're upset with my word choice.
But again, you're trying to get the majority of people not to think that.
All right. Well, you can try all you want.
Which party has better policy proposals? 54% say Democrats. Which party has cultural values closer to your own? 61% say Republicans.
I really didn't think there were that many rapists out there, but I guess they have that value. Weird. Okay.
And then open-ended question, why'd you vote for Youngkin? All McAuliffe said was he's like Trump. He's obviously not. Democrats have to get gas prices under control. Terry McAuliffe said what my kid learns isn't my business. And McAuliffe had a rally with the president of the teachers union.
Okay. I mean,
teachers are nice. If Democrats had passed the bipartisan infrastructure package before the election, would have you considered changing your vote? 91% said no.
Of course not.
And one woman laughed and said, what's that got to do with anything?
Right.
I know less about what's in the infrastructure bill than I do about CRT.
That's probably true. Yeah, well, that was always a ridiculous thing to say, but you'd be amazed how many people believed it who had votes on whether or not the infrastructure bill passed.
Right. So in post-perspective, Magdi Semrau, known as Manji J on Twitter, says, you think Democrats can't talk about race effectively? Biden shows why that's wrong. In 2020, Biden spoke candidly about systemic racism and grim episodes in American history while also attracting swing voters. And there's a lesson there and goes through Biden's speeches, including more recent ones, and basically says Democrats can do better in part by learning from Biden. It's easy to imagine how Biden would handle the issue of critical race theory, which was devised as a tactic for misleading voters about Democrat agenda, and leaving a fog of negative connotations. He might dismiss it as malarkey because then, that's what he does, and then he moves on to other issues.
Yeah. Okay.
All right? It's the same thing as I do when people write on Twitter about this, that, and anything else that Biden did, and it seemed to work. And I say, thanks, Brandon.
The new Thanks, Brandon movement. It's catching on. I've seen it.
Well, it should, because that's the only answer, because, make fun of it.
Yeah.
Well, it's far too serious to make fun. No, make fun of it.
I'm always for that.
Biden is far from the only Democrat who successfully campaigned on anti-racism. Lauren Underwood, Lucy McBath, Ralph Warnock. The idea that Democrats are inept at talking about race ignores several prominent political contests in which they've talked about the issue quite effectively, including at the top of the ticket, and I would add Obama to that too. Biden spent the latter half of his 2020 campaign speaking about racial justice. And he didn't win the presidency by activating the enthusiasm of Democrats. He flipped 2 red states, Georgia and Arizona. If Democrats adopt aspects of his rhetorical approach, they can stay true to their core principles while also possibly winning.
I would like that.
Right?
Put me down for one of those, please.
That's all I'm saying. Persuasion is still a thing, and we have to do it. And the whole thing about that focus group, you can take issue with this or that, or why did they say that? The point is that's what they thought. And these are persuadable voters, and we know that because they voted for Northam and Biden. And so don't just dismiss them, folks.
All right. You can dismiss parts of what they say. You're wrong about that. But, that was part of the discussion yesterday. It's about time to sit down and say, let me just say you're right about A, B, and C, and you're not so right about D. Is that okay with you?
Yeah. So, there you have it.
Okay. Well, let's have an insurrection and throw everybody off of every committee. I discussed this yesterday with Joan. Our conclusion was, let's just start over. Everybody's off of every committee. We're going to just use this as a great starting point to revamp the committee system entirely.
Well, but that's in the House. Why don't you start with the Senate? Just get rid of the filibuster.
Well, that too.
Oh, wait, you've already suggested that.
I have suggested that. People are coming around on this, in terms of waking up to the reality of it here. We still have the 2 holdouts.
I don't use Pocket, but somewhere in the bowels of this computer, I have an article stored about how you got credit for that.
Yeah, I have it somewhere. I like to tell people about it. It was correct, too. So that's what I really like about it. But it's only one. I have one article. I need multiple sources, and I don't have that. Yeah. So, that's why I haven't written my book.
I think you were right. Yeah. Anyway, with that, Abby's going to go get ready for the Garbage Parliamentarian, who's going to be here soon, the sanitation engineer.
Right. And, remember, you don't have to take his suggestion.
Yeah, but you better.
I don't have to take this garbage if you don't want me to. No. Right? Go ahead. I respect your opinion.
If you don't want to take the garbage, you're going to have to overrule me and figure out how. Right. So with that,
happy to do it.
It's Wednesday. I didn't push all the wrong buttons, and I'll be back tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. Maybe by then we'll have 5 rulings from different courts about whether or not the National Archives has to tell us what actually happened, and maybe we'll know more about whether Mike Pence really was locked out of the office.
Yeah, I would like to know more about that. That would be an interesting...
If any of you have more information, tweet David.
Right, or hey, tweet...
or use the hashtag KITM.
Mueller, she wrote. Let her have the exclusive. That's fine with me. I wouldn't know what to do with it. But I am very interested in finding that out. And people did point out that should be a fairly, simple thing to verify, mechanically speaking. Like, there's probably not that many places where you can shut off the vice president's access card, and not that many people who could pull that off if it did happen. But
what I'm saying is that if you have sources, contact Mueller, she wrote. But if you have links, send them to David.
Oh, yeah, right. Definitely do that. Because then I'll send them to Scott. And he'll do his
and that's how it works.
Yeah.
All righty, take care, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.
Fantastic. Thanks, Greg. See you tomorrow. And good, that doesn't leave a big gap in between now and the next report. Yeah, let's dive into some of these things, because there is some background stuff. I was amazed to see some of the discussion of the NRA's secret tapes, of course, and lots of stuff distilled out of it. I guess what really struck me was that, Greg jumped right to the conclusion, accurate, definitely reflects their discussion accurately, that they basically said, we got to stand up and, kind of double down on this stuff. Don't back down, don't apologize, don't look weak, make it, don't back off any. But the beginning of the conversation, they really seemed to be thinking about doing that. I only got so far in it. We might as well, maybe we'll read through it, because it's not a transcript of the 2 hours of the conversation, but I'll show you what struck me. So NPR, Tim Mack is the author of the piece here, and I guess the reporter on the radio. You can listen to the piece as well. A secret tape made after Columbine shows the NRA's evolution on school shootings. Kind of non-committal, the headline there. But here's Here's the deal, as Joe Biden would say if he were reading you this thing. Soon after the Columbine High School shooting in 1999, senior leaders of the National Rifle Association huddled on a conference call to consider canceling their annual convention, scheduled just days later and a few miles away. And as I recall, they did not cancel that thing, and they went ahead with it. 13 people lay dead at a high school in Colorado. More than 20 were injured. Images of students running from the school were looped on TV. The NRA strategists on the call sounded shaken and panicked as they pondered their next step into what would become an era of routine and horrific mass school shootings. Wonder how that happened. And in those private moments, the NRA considered a strikingly more sympathetic posture toward mass shootings than the uncompromising stance it has taken publicly in a decade since, even considering a $1 million fund to care for the victims. And then they said, to hell with that. NPR has obtained more than 2.5 hours of recordings of the private meetings after the Columbine shooting, which offer unique insight into the NRA's deliberations in the wake of this crisis and how it has struggled to develop what has become its standard response to school shootings ever since. Now, the part of the conversation that got me here was the part where they were saying, actually, maybe we shouldn't do this. And it just seemed so, I don't know. I mean, it's like you say, there's almost, tongue-in-cheek saying, how adorable. There was a moment here where they thought we really can't be out front beating our chests here and saying there's nothing wrong with guns and doubling down on our position. We just can't do that. And lots of you think that will work. But let me just tell you, it's just not going to fly. And you're like, aw, that's so cute. They thought that they could soften their position and even entertained it for a little while. That's so nice of them, except that they didn't do that. And what the hell's going on here? Everything we do has a downside, says NRA official Kay Robinson on these tapes. Don't anybody kid yourself about this great macho thing of going down there and showing our chest. I think that Kay probably meant beating our chest and showing how damn tough we are. We are in deep S word on this one. Ooh, I'm 10 seconds behind, speaking of being in deep S, on my music. So we'll cut out in an odd place here. But that's it. We're in deep S on this deal. And so anything we do here is going to be a matter of trying to decide the best of a whole bunch of very, very bad choices. But I like that. Don't anybody kid yourself about the idea of this macho thing of going down there and beating our chest. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I know the music's in a funny place because we started late, but this is where the breaks are timed. And I almost got to finish my sentence before we jumped into the break. I just was saying that, you know what I was trying to get out was that here is this NRA official saying, don't kid yourself about this macho thing of going down there and beating our chest and showing how tough we are. And then that's what they essentially did. I don't know that they did it right on the spot at Columbine, but that's what they've done since. And just so, sad that at one point it sounded like they were getting advice on being human about these things. And then it all fell apart. And I guess the rest of the piece is about it falling apart. Are we interested in listening to the evolution? Perhaps a little bit more. The tapes of the NRA discussions are recorded secretly by a participant. That's interesting, too. I'd like to know who did that. And shared on the condition that the participant's name not be divulged, so I guess we won't find out. NPR has taken steps to verify the tape's authenticity. They're pretty old. Including by confirming the identities of those speaking on the tapes with two sources and comparing the voices on the calls with publicly available audio. In addition to, by the way, that was a method that they could not use to nail down definitively that Donald Trump was John Barron. But, maybe the tape was in poor condition. Anyway, somebody's been holding this tape for a long time. In addition to mapping out their national strategy, NRA leaders can also be heard describing the organization's more activist members. This is kind of interesting. In surprisingly harsh terms. Deriding them as hillbillies and fruitcakes who might go off script after Columbine and embarrass them. And so that was interesting. Maybe as damage control, they said, we better go down there and beat our chest and sound crazy, because if we don't, our members will, and not only will we lose out on being reelected to leadership, perhaps, if that is such a thing, if they even have such elections. But we're going to end up there anyway, so we might as well own it. But it is interesting, you imagine that there are similar discussions inside, say, the Trump operation. Our supporters are disgusting, but don't say that because, they give us money and give us power. So we love them for that reason, but they're horrible people. I don't want to go anywhere near them. All right, back to this. The NRA leaders also dismiss conservative politicians and gun industry representatives as largely inconsequential players, saying they'll do whatever the NRA proposes. Don't worry about them. They'll just take instructions from us. Probably true. Members of Congress, one participant says, have asked the NRA to, quote, secretly provide them with talking points. I don't know why they have to keep it a secret. Everyone knows it's happening. Asked for comment, a current NRA spokesperson said, it is disappointing that anyone would promote an editorial agenda against the NRA by using shadowy sources and mystery tapes in order to conjure up the tragic events of over 20 years ago. Except this is your people, so blah, blah, blah. The Columbine shooting in Littleton, Colorado was at the time the deadliest school shooting since the late 1960s, threatening to provide a tragic backdrop to the NRA's previously scheduled annual convention in Denver. Billboards advertising a world-class guns and gear expo already peppered the city. Meanwhile, hate mail began arriving at the NRA offices. And why not? They're not afraid of it, right? They have guns. One day after the shooting, the NRA's top executives, officials, lobbyists, and public relations strategists all scrambled onto a conference call to deal with the crisis. Executive Vice President Wayne LaPierre is on the line, as is longtime NRA lobbyist Marion Hammer and advertising strategist Angus McQueen, among others. The dilemma they face is apparent in their conversations. Marion Hammer, I think, is also I recognize the name. I think that might be the Florida person who was also head of the Florida NRA and, one of the big backers and pushers of the Stand Your Ground stuff. But I might be wrong about that. Anyway, this goes on and says, at that same period where they're going to be burying these children, we're going to be having media trying to run through the exhibit hall looking at kids fondling firearms, which is going to be horrible, horrible, horrible juxtaposition, says NRA lobbyist Jim Baker on the conference call, not the televangelist one. I've got to tell you, we got to think this through because if we tuck tail and run, we're going to be accepting responsibility for what happened out there, says NRA official Jim Land. That's one very good argument, Jim, replies PR consultant Tony Macris. On the other side, if you don't appear to be deferential in honoring the dead, you end up being a tremendous S-head who wouldn't tuck tail and run, So it's a double-edged sword, and they hate swords. The NRA public relations gurus weren't just worried about the propriety of a gun show either. Parties and banquets were planned, even an appearance by a comedian. They struggled with whether to cancel the convention entirely, proceed with a pared-down event, or just go ahead as planned. The NRA considered other options as well, as illustrated by this exchange. Here's Kay Robinson saying, hopefully not more about showing her chest, but is there something concrete that we can offer? Not because guns are responsible, but because we care about these people? Is there anything? Does that look crass? And Jim Baker here, the lobbyist, says, you mean the legislative? No, I'm talking about something concrete. Legislation is not concrete. PR consultant Tony Macris says, like a victims fund. Robinson agrees that, we create a victims fund and we give the victims $1 million or something like that. There's a lot of thought going into this. Does that look bad, or does it look, and Macris says, well, that can be twisted too. Why? Why are you giving money? You feel responsible? Baker says, no, well, you're true. It can be twisted, but we feel sympathetic. And, NRA spokesperson Bill Powers at this point chimes in and says, respectful. Sorta. The strategists ultimately decided that canceling their convention would deny them a platform to respond to criticism, and also that a cancellation would be an opportunity for attacks by the national media. Hammer, a longtime NRA lobbyist who once served as its president, weighs in with an unyielding view. She tells LaPierre that even if they don't lose money, they would lose face if they canceled. You've got to go forward, she says. For NRA to scrap this and the amount of money that we have spent, we have meeting insurance. LaPierre replies. Screw the insurance, says Hammer. The message that it will send is that even the NRA was brought to its knees and the media will have a field day with it. They probably would have, too. Hammer and LaPierre are also among the NRA officials who can be heard disparaging some of the group's membership. In the aftermath of the shooting, McQueen reasons that, quote, normal members would stay away from the site of the tragedy, leaving only the group's most extreme members as attendees. At the convention? Oh, okay. The hair on the back of my neck stood up when this thought occurred to her, Hammer says. It's a recurrent internal problem with the NRA. Often its most radical members are also the most passionate, dedicated, and outspoken. The NRA exists, in part, to advocate for legislation and often to make compromises to see bills pass into law. But a hardline faction in the NRA is uninterested in those compromises or any position other than the most expansive view of the Second Amendment. You know, the other problem is holding a member meeting without an exhibit hall. The people you are most likely to get in that member meeting without an exhibit hall are the nuts, says LaPierre. Made that point earlier. I agree, says Macris. The fruitcakes are going to show up. Says Hammer, if you pull down the exhibit hall, that's not going to leave anything for the media except the members meeting, and you're going to have all the wackos with all kinds of crazy resolutions, with all kinds of dressing like a bunch of hillbillies and idiots. And it's gonna be the worst thing you can imagine. Well, the tapes are slightly worse, I guess. The tapes also show that the NRA was shaken by the negative press following the Oklahoma City bombing of 1995, which targeted the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and other federal agencies. A week before that bombing, the NRA put out a fundraising letter calling the ATF jackbooted government thugs. That was them, eh? And after the bombing, LaPierre had defended this rhetoric. In the ensuing firestorm, former Republican President George H.W. Bush publicly resigned as an NRA member in protest. This led to an exodus of some 500,000 members, a number that has never been reported prior to now. What we're trying to avoid here, I think, is what happened after the Oklahoma City bombing, says PR advisor McQueen. When we lost control of a situation and the result was 500,000 members, the President of the United States bailing out on us, and a firestorm of negative media that if you went back and looked at, it was probably in the hundreds of millions of dollars in opposition to us and our point of view. And I think this will be worse, responds Baker. Baker can also be heard telling others not to worry about the stance of the firearms industry. While some critics of the NRA claim that the organization is beholden to the firearms industry, NRA leaders on the call claimed the opposite, that the industry was ready and willing to follow their lead. Like in this exchange, where Macris says, Jim, let me ask you a question. What's the industry going to do? Baker responds, I think the industry will do whatever we ask them to do. Do you think they have a preference, Jim? This is LaPierre. Is there anybody we ought to be talking to? Baker answers, I talked to Delphi this morning, and he said they stand ready to help us orchestrate whatever we want to do. They're just waiting to know. Robert Delphi was the head of an industry trade group. They discussed the role of Republican politicians in the Columbine fallout as well and say they, too, are looking to the NRA for guidance. We got a call from Congressman Tancredo, remember him? Who is as good as they get, and he's nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof, says Baker. Oh, boy, love the metaphors. LaPierre claims that Senate Majority Whip Don Nichols, a Republican of Oklahoma, if you don't remember him, had secretly asked him for talking points to use after the shooting. I was talking to Nichols' office this morning, and what they told me is they're planning on sending them all to schools, the talking points, I guess, because what they wanted us to do was secretly provide them from talking points, or I guess send all the members to schools. The NRA ultimately decided to hold its convention in Denver, after the shootings, albeit vastly scaled down in size. It was met by thousands of protesters, and inside, then NRA President Charlton Heston, remember that? Delivered the defiant message that its leaders had planned out in their private calls, a message very similar to the group's position on mass shootings today. The national media is not to be trusted, and any conversation about guns in the NRA after mass shootings is an untoward politicization of the issue. Why us? Because their story needs a villain. They want us to play the heavy in their drama of packaged grief to provide riveting programming to run between commercials for cars and cat food, Heston said at the time, to applause. The dirty secret of this day and age is that political gain and media ratings all too often bloom on fresh graves. It's good speech, just bad content. Over the next 2 decades, this unapologetic message would come to define the NRA's tone in the wake of mass shootings at American schools. After 32 people were killed at Virginia Tech in 2007. This is a time for people to grieve, to mourn, and to heal. This is not a time for political discussion or political policy debates. After the 2012 shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary School, the only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. After the 2018 shooting at a high school in Parkland, Florida, NRA says many in legacy media love mass shootings. NPR reached out to the NRA and provided it with transcripts of the audio we used in this story. Guess what? To protect our source and keep it in keeping with prior practice, we did not provide the tape, so they couldn't figure it out. An NRA spokesperson called the story a hit piece and complained that the NRA was denied the tape. And you got the transcript. So anyway, that's the full reporting on it from NPR. Just thought it might be worth running through their version of it and listening to the evolution of their position. Back over to the briefly mentioned, did we even get into the details of what it was about the 13 members of the Trump administration who were called out for illegal campaign-related activity? I'll start with the factual reporting on this yesterday from the Washington Post. This was all the Hatch Act violations that were being investigated. You remember all that. Very frequently, Kellyanne Conway was, I think, accused at least twice of violating the Hatch Act and engaging in campaign-style activities on public time and with public dollars and in public settings, which is supposed to be illegal. And we learned, many of us did during the Trump administration, that the Hatch Act is said not to apply to the president, him or herself, because of, I guess, the inherent commingling of roles in the one person. Trump, of course, took great advantage of that and just said it's impossible for me to violate the Hatch Act, so I can just do whatever I want. And if I order people to do things that would otherwise be a violation of the Hatch Act for them to do, they can lean on my order as some sort of an excuse. That's not supposed to be the way it works. But guess what? It turns out that it is the way that it works, even though the Office of Special Counsel, which did this investigation and put out this report, is desperate to say otherwise. But it's just a comical abdication of responsibility and a comical admission that there's now no such thing as the Hatch Act for Republicans is basically the outcome of this. The factual reporting on it from yesterday: at least 13 Trump officials illegally campaigned while in office, federal investigation finds. This is Lisa Rein, R-E-I-N, doing this frontline reporting on it. At least 13 senior Trump administration officials illegally mixed governing with campaigning before the 2020 election, intentionally ignoring a law that prohibits merging the two and getting approval to break it. A federal investigation released Tuesday found. A report from the Office of Special Counsel Henry Kerner describes a, quote, willful disregard for the law, unquote, known as the Hatch Act, that was, quote, especially pernicious, given that many officials abused their government roles days before the November election, and some of them did it throughout the entirety of the Trump term. President Donald Trump, whose job it was to discipline his political appointees, allowed them to illegally promote his reelection on the job, despite warnings to some from ethics officials, the report says. This failure to impose discipline created conditions for what appeared to be, and was, a taxpayer-funded campaign apparatus within the upper echelons of the executive branch, investigators wrote in a scathing 60-page report. But who cares if it's scathing, because nothing happens. But, you know the Hatch Act. If you're not familiar with it, it's basically the law that you probably inherently felt should be in place. You're not supposed to be able to use the resources of the government entrusted to you by virtue of having been elected president to campaign for another term as president or for any real political ends. You can certainly push for policy. That has political implications, yes. But you're not supposed to use taxpayer money to pay for your own electioneering to give yourself access to more taxpayer money to use for your own ends. That's the problem. But Trump, A, doesn't understand or willfully will not understand what it means to commingle these things, or, his whole business model is, I don't care where the money comes from, just so long as I get my hands on it and I can use it however I want. And that gets him into a lot of trouble in business when he's occasionally taken to task for it. And it should have gotten him in a lot of trouble in government, except nobody knows what to do with a president who says, to hell with it, the reputational damage, I don't care. So F it, break all the laws you want. And if you really can't get away with it, I'll pardon you. And then that'll be the end of it. The president's refusal to require compliance with the law laid the foundation for the violations, the report says. In each of these instances, senior administration officials used their official authority or influence to campaign for President Trump. Fat lot of good it did him, by the way. He lost, but okay. Based on the Trump administration's reaction to the violations, OSC, the Office of Special Counsel, concludes that the most logical inference is that the administration approved of these taxpayer-funded campaign activities. Well, they did. They said as much. They certainly demonstrated as much, and that's what they're saying. The special counsel found that 2 cabinet officials, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and, I need a sound effect for this one. Who else?
Acting!
Yes, acting Homeland Security Chief Chad Wolf broke the law when Pompeo gave a speech from Israel and Wolf led a taped naturalization ceremony for newly minted citizens on White House grounds, both during the Republican National Convention. You remember? And this was the kind of thing that Trump would have done regardless. These are trappings of office as he views them, and he holds the office. And yes, he's running for nomination to run for re-election, and he purports not to understand why any of this should have been separated. Of course, we're having a naturalization ceremony at the Republican National Convention because, I run the government and this is a perk. I can do whatever I want. Of course, you will have a speech by the Secretary of State given from Israel piped into the room because I'm the president and I can do whatever I want. The investigation was prompted by an unprecedented swell of complaints to the independent agency that enforces the Hatch Act following Trump's decision during the coronavirus pandemic to hold the convention at the White House. The probe started when Trump was still president because that's when the violations started. But the report concluded that while the Hatch Act bars most federal employees, excluding the president and vice president, from politicking while on duty or in a federal office, it does not impose similar restrictions on others who were, in this case, hosting, organizing, or attending the convention. That's fine. You don't even need those. The Office of Special Counsel, led by a Republican appointed by Trump, lays out a series of violations that the authors underscore were not innocent mistakes or slips of the tongue. So his own appointee says this. Now, here's the part where it really turns into a joke. No punishment is expected to be assessed because, by most legal interpretations, the president in office at the time is the only person who can take action to fire or reprimand his political appointees when they act illegally. The office's lengthy treatment of how the administration flouted a law intended to ensure that civil servants and political appointees operate free of political influence was meant to illustrate that the law lacks teeth and needs stronger enforcement mechanisms, the report says. OSC is issuing this report to educate employees about Hatch Act prohibited activities, to highlight the enforcement challenges that the office confronted during its investigations, and deter similar violations in the future, investigators wrote. Except that's not possible given what you're doing, which is, I guess it's not the report's fault per se. The report can't sentence anybody to prison. It can't, I guess it could recommend that people be prosecuted and and sent to prison. But it doesn't. But even if it did, it wouldn't be able to do anything about it. But basically, OSC is issuing this report to educate employees about a Hatch Act prohibited activity. Why? The next Republican president will just say, do whatever you want. The only way you can get punished for violating the Hatch Act is if I decide to punish you, and I'm not going to. So it's free. Go for it. Democrats will, of course, say, we don't operate this way. We're not going to do it. And so it's going to be a one-way street, just like everything else. Republicans will just violate this law and use taxpayer dollars and resources to campaign for re-election. I guess, I wish that we wouldn't have this waste of money going on, but I guess if the result is they all lose their bids for re-election, if it happens that way every time, I'll take it. But I don't have any reason to believe that that's a cause and effect relationship. Trump was uniquely crappy as a human being, not let alone as a president. That's what caused him to lose. The Hatch Act violations were never going to save him. Anyway, the upshot of it is that they're saying only the president can hand out that punishment. We all know that Republican presidents from now on will just simply refuse to hand out that punishment. Democrats will do it to show, we're not hypocrites, and we'll be axing people left and right. But in the meantime, Republicans will do this. The political appointees who violated the law by blatantly promoting Trump's reelection or disparaging rival Joe Biden in media interviews were Energy Secretary Dan Brouillette. I don't even remember this guy, but is that how you say his name? Brouillette. Brouillette. I have no idea that he was Energy Secretary. Senior Counselor Kellyanne Conway, like 15 times. White House Director of Strategic Communications Alyssa Farah, who I think tried to bail out on the insurrection and turn herself into a last-minute good guy. I don't think it worked. U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman. Senior Advisor Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. His wife and Trump's daughter Ivanka somehow left out of this. But whatever. Senior Advisor Jared Kushner, Trump's son-in-law. Press Secretary Kayleigh McEnany, who just got her subpoena the other day. White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, already under subpoena. Everybody on this list pretty much is subpoenaed already, with nothing to do with the Hatch Act violations. Although it may turn out that the testimony that they're being asked to give also is indicative of Hatch Act violations, not coincidentally. Who else? Senior Advisor Stephen Miller, Deputy White House Press Secretary Brian Morgenstern, Mark Short, Chief of Staff to Vice President Mike Pence, and National Security Advisor Robert C. O'Brien. The Post has sought comment. Yeah, I guess so. From those whose actions were cited in the report, and none has responded publicly. I guess they're privately whispering, perhaps. The Trump White House was well aware of the Hatch Act's restrictions, the report says, having received an unprecedented 15 letters from Kerner's office during his presidency, laying out violations, and 2 reports on a repeat violator, Conway. Pompeo and Wolf both ignored repeated warnings, why wouldn't you, from career ethics officials and attorneys that they would be breaking the law with their appearances at the convention, the report found. An ethics official even warned Wolf 45 minutes before the naturalization ceremony was taped that he should not move forward. And the answer to that was, F you. If at worst, I'll get pardoned. But in reality, I'll just never be prosecuted for it. And he was right. The report found that the naturalization ceremony, quote, was orchestrated for the purpose of creating content for the convention, and that both events stemmed directly from requests that originated from the Trump campaign or possibly the president himself. Of course I did it. Why not? There's no penalties. It's not against the law. If there's no penalty, who can say whether it even is against the law? And he's right. He's a constitutional scholar all of a sudden. Thus, says the report, they reflect the Trump administration's willingness to manipulate government business for partisan political ends, the report says. Pompeo changed a long-standing State Department policy to allow himself to speak at the convention. The policy had prohibited the secretary and all other political appointees at the agency from engaging in partisan political activities. He approved the change, only for himself, days before he delivered a taped speech from Jerusalem to the convention, the report says. Didn't work. Jews still think he's an idiot. Investigators also said Pompeo violated a State Department rule on speaking about politics while abroad. Internal emails show that the White House had planned to publicize a naturalization ceremony hosted by a, quote, high-level principal in September 2020, but moved the event to the convention at the last minute. In a written statement to the special counsel's office, we're going to bump up against our music, Wolf said he did not know whether video of the ceremony was going to be made publicly available or that it would be used at the Republican National Convention, he says. In Farah's case, she appeared on Fox News in her official capacity on October 9th, weeks before the election, and told an interviewer of the two presidential candidates, "I can't think of a starker contrast between two candidates against each other than even while sick with COVID, the president's got boundless energy," can hardly walk up the steps, "and is taking questions and being as transparent as possible on his positions, and the fact that we still don't have basic answers on policy from the Joe Biden campaign." Well, all a violation, and then I guess they detail all the rest of them here, if you want to look it all up. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, the same guy who was just talking to you a second ago. Our Patreon subscription drive is still going strong, with over 175 monthly donors who help keep us on the air. If we've helped keep you going during the pandemic, why not return the favor and help us keep going so we can all be together for the next disaster? Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it easy to make secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for keeping you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We literally could not do this without you. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Networks Radio, into our last segment here. The article, by the way, goes on to detail, as I said, a couple other of the violations during the Trump administration. And just for balance, details some violations in Democratic administrations as well, including one, a total of one so far, in the Biden administration involving Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcia Fudge, who got a warning in March about comments she made at a White House news conference when she weighed in on the possibility that Democrats could win the 2022 Senate race in Ohio. Fudge apologized for the comments, and I guess that's the big difference between the two parties at this point. They go on to detail some other ones, complaints that have been levied, things from the Obama administration, et cetera, et cetera. Of some interest here, the summation at the end. The 1939 law was originally titled An Act to Prevent Pernicious Political Activities. It applies to civil servants and political appointees alike, but the Trump administration showcased that there appears to be a two-tiered system of consequences. The special counsel's office fined, and in some cases fired, hundreds of career employees, they can fire them directly, for violations during the 4 years when Trump was in office. So hundreds of people got fired for Hatch Act violations in the lower echelons. The top people get a pass. Well, you know, there's no two ways about it, and no other way of interpreting it. Let's see. For an opinion piece, or an analysis piece perhaps, on the same subject, Philip Bump gets another call this week. In his piece entitled, "A Year Later, an Obviously Illegal Campaign Stunt is Determined to Have Been Illegal. Haven't we made great progress here?" You have to imagine that it isn't cheap to maintain the White House. It's a large mansion with countless historical items and a large staff. It is a manifestation of the power of the presidency, so it is well tended and generally, he says in parentheses, well kept. Although it constitutes only a small part of the federal government's overall spending, its upkeep is nonetheless covered by American taxpayers. That's why there are rules meant to keep politicians from using the White House for political purposes. As is the case with federal officials and other government offices and resources, it is a violation of the Hatch Act to leverage the White House or, say, a cabinet position in service of a political campaign. Earlier this year, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki was justifiably criticized for promoting the gubernatorial candidacy of Virginia Democrat Terry McAuliffe from the White House. She was contrite, but the damage was done. Government resources, Psaki's time on the job, the White House's system for news briefings, those are all the resources, had been used to aid a candidate. If Psaki's apparent violation was the equivalent of shoplifting, violations under the Trump administration were a veritable crime spree, culminating in one last job during last year's Republican National Convention. Donald Trump and his team were never dissuaded by the Hatch Act. Numerous officials were cited for violating its rules during his presidency, but since punishment came down to Trump, they skated. The effectiveness of the Hatch Act depends on people recognizing that there's a rule in place and why it's in place, and it depends on people holding one another accountable for following that rule. Trump and his staff paid no heed to either. That was very obvious during last year's National Party Convention. Far from avoiding the politicization of the White House, Trump worked hard to leverage it. It wasn't simply using the White House as a backdrop for campaign events or commercials either. He tried to frame his residency in the building as being something that Democrats were trying unfairly to take away from him, not as a limited time rental under the bounds of American law. The apex of this effort to leverage his position and government resources to aid his campaign was a remarkable segment that aired during the convention. In it, Trump participated in a naturalization ceremony at the White House for a group of immigrants to the United States. The recorded segment was as subtle as the interior design at Trump Tower, allowing Trump to extend graciousness to new Americans, with the acting Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security, Chad Wolf, playing MC. It was instantly obvious that the stunt was a violation of the Hatch Act. Although Trump's team tried hard to spin it, they claimed that the ceremony was simply part of Trump's public business, as usual, something that they just happened to record and then decided to air during the convention. Wolf was later asked whether he was aware that the ceremony was going to be part of the convention. He tried his best to talk around the issue. There was no reason to grant Trump and Wolf the benefit of the doubt on the matter. Trump had already displayed zero interest in avoiding the use of government resources to aid his re-election bid, as evidenced most obviously in the interactions with Ukraine that led to his first impeachment. What's more, the naturalization event was obviously staged for political purposes, something that Trump had done once previously during his term in office. On Tuesday, the verdict of the Office of the Special Counsel came in. Wolf and Trump had, in fact, violated the Hatch Act. Well, no kidding. The OSC report did make clear just how obviously the violation occurred. While the Trump White House at first tried to claim that the ceremony's inclusion in the convention was last minute and independent of politics, the OSC obtained emails indicating that more than a week before, the White House had asked Homeland Security to schedule a ceremony during the convention, later acknowledging it would be pre-taped for the convention itself. Over and over, the OSC warned Trump's team that it would be violating the law if it moved forward as planned. OSC repeatedly warned both DHS and the Trump White House that because the ceremony was designed to produce content for the RNC, the proposed naturalization ceremony would violate the Hatch Act, even if it was later characterized as an official event, the report says. OSC first advised DHS ethics officials of this on August 20th, prior to the event being reclassified as an official event, and again on August 25th, the morning of the event, after learning that it had been reclassified. OSC similarly advised the White House on August 20th and 24th. As late as 10 a.m. on the morning of the ceremony, just 45 minutes prior to the event, the DHS ethics official emailed DHS leadership, including the General Counsel, stating that acting Secretary Wolf should not participate in this ceremony. But he did it. He did it anyway. When the OSC asked the White House attorney for more information, the attorney claimed that discussions were privileged, a very familiar excuse. Although the OSC could not prove that Wolf knew the ceremony would be part of the convention, it makes very clear that Wolf would have been hard-pressed not to know that. In the news release announcing its findings that extend beyond this one incident to include more than a dozen Trump administration officials, the OSC notes that it's pretty much powerless at this point. We read that part. In the future, that will continue to depend, that is to say, deterrence, on whether officials care about reprimands from the OSC and whether presidents care to punish members of their staffs. It took only hours to be obvious that the naturalization ceremony violated the Hatch Act, but it took more than a year for the OSC to affirmatively conclude that it had. This is probably in part because there was no recourse for correction, so there was little urgency in issuing isolated analyses of the administration's behavior. A prohibition that neither serves to prohibit actions nor to hold to account those who violate it is not a prohibition at all. It's just a request, one that people like Trump are free to ignore. And now, 15 months later, we can say, yes, the stunt was a violation of the law. But then we also have to ask, so what? And unfortunately, he's correct too. So, speaking of the jerky things that these people do, let's see. There's others and other jerks working inside the administration whose machinations now are being uncovered. Let's see. I mentioned to you that the January 6th committee had issued some subpoenas. I want to run down who got subpoenaed and give you some background on some of the people that you might not recognize and why they're getting subpoenaed. This is from the press release from the committee. Benny Thompson, as chair, put it out, and they just run down the names here. The select committee issued subpoenas for records and testimony from the following individuals. Nicholas Luna, who served as the former president's personal assistant, was reportedly in the Oval Office on the morning of January 6th when the former president was on a phone call with Pence, pressuring him not to certify the results. Molly Michael, special assistant to the president and Oval Office operations coordinator, involved in sending information about alleged election fraud to various individuals at the direction of President Trump, according to information obtained by the Select Committee. Benjamin Williamson, deputy assistant to the president and senior advisor to Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, who was reportedly contacted by a former White House official during the attack on the U.S. Capitol, who urged him and Mr. Meadows, without success, to have the former president issue a statement addressing the attack and condemning the violence. Also subpoenaed Christopher Liddell, Liddell, former White House deputy chief of staff, who was in the White House on January 6th and reportedly considered resigning on that day, but stayed on after a great deal of persuasion. That's a quote, after a great deal of persuasion. John McEntee. Now, that's a person whose name I had a glimmer of recognition for. And now this coincides with some big profiles of McEntee and what a jackass he really is. Maybe we'll finish out with that. But McEntee, former White House personnel director, a job he was horribly unqualified for, was reportedly present in the Oval Office when Rudy Giuliani, Justin Clark, the former president, former vice president, discussed the audit process in Georgia and listened as Mr. Giuliani suggested seizing Dominion voting machines because of alleged fraud. McEntee was also reportedly involved in communications with officials in various federal agencies regarding loyalty to President Trump and specifically discouraged a number of individuals from seeking employment after the election as it would appear to be a concession of Trump's defeat. In addition, according to reports, McEntee was in the White House on January 6th and was with former President Trump when he traveled to the Ellipse and spoke at the so-called Stop the Steal rally. Other names: Keith Kellogg, Vice President Pence's national security advisor, reportedly participated in at least one January 2021 meeting with the former president and Pat Cipollini, during which the former president insisted that former Vice President Pence not certify the election. He was reportedly in the White House with former president as he watched the January 6th attack unfold and has direct information about the former president's statements about and reaction to the insurrection. During that day, it's reported that Lieutenant General Kellogg met with the former president, and others before the rally at the Ellipse, and then, after the rally, he urged the former president to send out a tweet to his supporters at the U.S. Capitol to help control the crowd. Kayleigh McEnany got a subpoena. You know who she is and why she would have been on hand. Stephen Miller, similar. Cassidy Hutchinson, you might not know. She served as special assistant to the president for legislative affairs and reportedly was at the White House on January 6th and was with the former president when he spoke at the rally that day. She also reportedly reached out directly via email and phone to Georgia Deputy Secretary of State Jordan Fuchs, relating to a trip to Georgia by White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows to attend an election audit. And finally, Kenneth Klukowski, former senior counsel to Assistant Attorney General Jeffrey Clark, who got his subpoena too, I think, last time, right, was involved in drafting a letter that urged legislators in certain states to delay certification of the election, according to the report recently released by the Senate Committee on the Judiciary. The report also states that Mr. Clark contacted Mr. Klukowski to prepare for an Oval Office meeting with the former president that took place on January 3rd, 2021. All the letters to the witnesses are linked herein. And so now you have an idea of the names and their roles that got their subpoenas this new round of subpoenas, plus some of the older characters with whom you're already familiar. Now, I mentioned, what's his name? McAtee. There's some more information about him. Oh, but before I do that, I'll add this analysis from over at TPM. I thought the headline sounded intriguing. January 6th panel takes the crucial step of broadening the probe beyond the Capitol attack. That seems interesting and important. Josh Kovensky, the other Josh at TPM, writing this. The two new batches of subpoenas from the committee, I'll just skip the details, send a strong signal that the panel will not over-focus on the Capitol attack as an isolated event, but will instead investigate the full Trump conspiracy to subvert the 2020 election. Other recent activities by the committee also suggest that the panel wants to probe the months of groundwork it took to create the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen, beginning in early 2020, and not just the insurrection itself. That, I guess, relates to the machinations in court and the pleadings in court that Greg mentioned, that they wanted to subpoena a broader array of materials and witnesses to get to the mindset, as Greg related to us. In the days before the January 6th attack, the former president's closest allies and advisors drove a campaign of misinformation about the election and planned ways to stop the count of electoral college votes. Panel chair Benny Thompson said, the select committee needs to know every detail about their efforts to overturn the election, including who they were talking to in the White House and in Congress, what connections they had with rallies that escalated into a riot, and who paid for it all. Former congressional investigations staffers expressed concern to TPM this summer that the probe wouldn't go far enough to understand the true scope of the attack, one that began with the attempt to subvert the election and continues through January 6th. Monday's subpoenas include Bill Stapien, we mentioned him yesterday, Mike Flynn, and Bernie Carrick as well. On Tuesday, the panel issued another round of subpoenas, taking the investigation deeper into how the big lie was promoted. We read through all of that. The expansion comes as Trump and those who pushed the big lie have become more aggressive in trying to block the investigation and in asserting that they were in the right. Jeff Clark, the former DOJ official who tried to have the department intervene in the election, stonewalled investigators on Friday. Federal prosecutors are currently reviewing whether to prosecute Steve Bannon for contempt of Congress after disobeying his committee subpoena. Trump, who retreated from public view for a few months after he left office, reportedly told Republican lawmakers on Monday that the real insurrection took place on Election Day 2020 and not January 6th, 2021. Sure, whatever. Now, some discussion of the new subpoenas. And I guess that, combined with earlier moves that the panel has taken, focus on the broader run-up to the insurrection. Take, for example, the subpoenas for Stapien and Miller. The two helped take the Trump campaign from being an operation aimed at re-election to a campaign against the election itself. Stapien helmed Trump's 2020 campaign before the former president had officially lost, but after voting ceased on November 3rd, Stapien was already proclaiming a win, right? Okay. Miller similarly spent the immediate post-election day period describing to reporters how the campaign wouldn't let voter fraud get in the way of what he described as an insurmountable lead. Others in the committee's batch of Tuesday subpoenas also played a part in the creation of the big lie. Let's see. Kayleigh McEnany, of course. Then the other names that we read. No further details on them, I guess. But at any rate, yeah, I think an important point there, and we can probably jump back out to other articles at this point. But a point well taken by the TPM reporters, just noting the expansion of the scope of the probe here. Now, I mentioned to you that there was more information out there on this Johnny McEntee. Big article in the Atlantic yesterday, I guess, came out under the title of "The Man Who Made January 6th Possible." Shouldn't we hear something about him? We don't know a great deal about this guy. This is some interesting information. The story of Johnny McEntee. It's McEntee. The, quote, deputy president who rose to power at precisely the moment when democracy was falling apart. This actually in the Atlantic by Jonathan Karl, who, of course, has the new book out, Betrayal, his book. And it sounded earlier this morning like the whole incident about Pence unloading dock was somehow related to Karl's reporting on all of this, too. So, big day for Jonathan Karl. Let's see what we can get through in the closing minutes of the show. In late October of 2020, Donald Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, was attending the confirmation hearing for Amy Coney Barrett when his cell phone rang. And it was God calling to say, "You're going to get COVID." But he answered it with a whisper and walked out to the hallway to take the call. What was so urgent as to pull the chief of staff out of a Supreme Court confirmation hearing just 2 weeks before a presidential election? Oh, it was the hearing, not the party. That's where all the COVID got passed around. On the line was Andrew Hughes, the top staffer at the Department of Housing and Urban Development. Meadows asked him to call because it had been brought to Meadows' attention that a young assistant at HUD had been caught consorting with the enemy. You might wonder what this is all about. What she had done was she had liked an Instagram post from the pop star Taylor Swift. Now, why would the chief of staff at the White House be getting calls about this? And it's this McEntee guy is at the heart of all this. The first photo in the post, by way of explanation, was of Swift with the word "vote" superimposed in large blue letters. But a swipe revealed a second photo of Swift carrying a tray of cookies emblazoned with the Biden-Harris campaign logo. We really can't have our people liking posts promoting Joe Biden, Meadows told Hughes. Never mind that nearly 3 million other people had liked the post, or that the young woman was a Taylor Swift fan who liked just about everything Swift had ever posted. To the enforcers of Trumpian loyalty, this was a sign of treachery in the ranks. Those enforcers, including the eagle-eyed official who had first spotted the offending like, worked for the Presidential Personnel Office, a normally under-the-radar group responsible for the hiring and firing of roughly 4,000 political appointees in the executive branch. During the final year of the Trump administration, that office was transformed into an internal police force, obsessively monitoring administration officials for any sign of dissent, purging those who were deemed insufficiently devoted to Trump and frightening others into silence. Many sources for this story asked to remain anonymous so that they could talk about sensitive personnel issues. Some Trump aides privately compared the PPO to the East German Stasi or even the Gestapo, always on the lookout for traitors within, and always the Germans who get the short end of the stick on this. Poor Germany. The office was run by head Nazi in charge Johnny McEntee. He didn't say anything about the Nazis, but okay. Just 29 years old, the guy running this office. When he got the job, he'd come up as Trump's body guy, the kid who carried the candidates' bags. That's who got the job. One of Trump's most high-profile cabinet secretaries described him to me as a effing idiot. Thank you. But in 2020, his power was undeniable because effing idiots had power in 2020. Trump knew he was the one person willing to do anything Trump wanted. As another senior official told me, he became the deputy president. This 29-year-old dude. McEntee and his enforcers made the disastrous last weeks of the Trump presidency possible. They backed the president's manic drive to overturn the election and helped set the stage for the January 6th assault on the Capitol. Thanks to them, in the end, the elusive adults in the room, those who might have been willing to confront the president or try to control his most destructive tendencies, were silenced or gone. But McEntee was there, bossing around cabinet secretaries, decapitating the civilian leadership at the Pentagon, and forcing officials high and low to state their allegiance to Trump. When Trump wasn't happy with the answers he was getting from White House counsel Pat Cipollone, McEntee set up a rogue legal team. The back-channel operation played a previously unknown role in the effort to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to overturn the vote. Just days before January 6th, McEntee sent Pence's office an absurd memo making the case that Pence would be following Thomas Jefferson's example if he used his power to declare Trump the winner of the 2020 election. More than anyone else in the White House, McEntee was Trump's man through and through, a man who rose to power at precisely the moment when American democracy was falling apart. I first met Johnny McEntee when I visited Trump Tower in 2015. Not long after Trump had announced he's running for president. McEntee was polite, earnest, and eager to please. He identified himself as Trump's trip director and gave me a tour of the campaign headquarters. He declined to comment for this story, by the way. McEntee was one of the first full-time staffers on the campaign, and he went everywhere Trump went. When Trump became president, McEntee had a workspace outside the Oval Office, right against the curved wall. The boss liked having McEntee around. A former quarterback for the University of Connecticut. Sorry, Greg. He was good-looking and tall, but not too tall, about an inch shorter than Trump. During the first 14 months of the Trump presidency, by the way, go online and look up how tall is McEntee since he was a football player. I bet you'll be surprised. During the first 14 months of the Trump presidency, McEntee did what he had done during the campaign. He carried Trump's bags. In March 2018, it looked for a moment like his Washington career was over. Do you remember this? He was fired by then Chief of Staff John Kelly after a long-delayed FBI background check. They finally got around to it. Revealed that he had deposited suspiciously large sums of money into his bank account. It turned out that the money was from gambling winnings, not good with the FBI. After Kelly was himself fired, McEntee, though, returned to his old spot outside the Oval. It was January 2020, and he wouldn't be just a body guy for long. In mid-February, Trump called his acting chief of staff, Mick Mulvaney, to a meeting. Ominous signs of the coming pandemic were beginning to emerge. Hundreds of Americans who had been evacuated from Wuhan, China, were in quarantine on military bases. The World Health Organization had just reported a frightening new development. A small new number of COVID-19 cases were in people who had never traveled to China. But the subject of the meeting wasn't the virus, it was staffing. Trump, newly acquitted in his first Senate impeachment trial, was looking to make some changes. I want to put Johnny in charge of personnel, the president told Mulvaney. The director of presidential personnel is responsible for vetting and hiring everybody, including ambassadors, cabinet secretaries, top intelligence officials. McEntee had never hired anybody for anything. Now he was going to be in charge of perhaps the most important human resources department in the world. Mulvaney called his top deputy, Emma Doyle, who oversaw the current director of personnel, into the meeting. Mr. President, she said, I've never said no to anything you've asked me to do, but I am going to ask you please to reconsider this. I don't think it's a good idea. Doyle had spent a lot of time around the president, but she had never seen him as angry as he was about to become. You people never effing listen to me, Trump screamed. You're going to effing do what I tell you to do. A few hours later, Doyle was on Air Force One, along with McEntee, en route to a Trump rally in New Hampshire. She asked him about his interest in the position. People have been telling me that I should do that for a long time, McEntee told her. It sounds just like Trump, right? I didn't feel ready before, but I'm 29 now, and I'm ready. I'm a big boy. He added, I'm the only person around here that's just here for the president. Oh boy, that's exactly what you need. McEntee told the president exactly what he wanted to hear, that his political problems were caused by people who pretended to support him, but were really against him. The secret never-Trumpers right here in this administration. It was time to root out the deep state. McEntee began scouring federal agencies for people who didn't support all things Trump. Beginning in June 2020, in the middle of both the pandemic and the presidential campaign, the Personnel Office informed virtually every senior official across the government, regardless of how long they had worked in the administration, that they would need to sit down for a job interview. Now, a president has the right to expect that his political appointees support his policies and will work to carry them out. These are, after all, political appointees, but most of the people McEntee's team questioned were already devoted to Trump. They were still putting their reputations on the line to work for him 3.5 years into his administration, but that wasn't enough for the loyalty enforcers. McEntee's underlings were, for the most part, comically inexperienced. Now get this, he had staffed his office with very young Trump activists. He hired his friends, and he hired young women. As one senior official in the West Wing put it to me, quote, the most beautiful 21-year-old girls you could find, and guys who would be absolutely no threat to Johnny in going after those girls. McEntee turns the Presidential Personnel Office into a personal dating service for himself. It was the Rockettes and the Dungeons and Dragons group, the official said. Wow. Well, there's an awful lot more to this, but you get some sense of where this guy is coming from. Wait till you read a little bit about how he conducts some of these interviews, asking cabinet secretaries, do you support the policies of the Trump administration, and if so, which ones? I mean, that's just a dumb question, generally, to ask, do you support the policies, and if so, which ones? Yeah, all of them? Some of them? I don't know. This was a question for a top official in the antitrust division of the Department of Justice, for God's sake. Anyway, much more to it. You should read it. We'll discuss it some more, I'm sure, during the rest of the week. Just wanted to give you a flavor of what this guy was about as you see his subpoena come out so you would know what was going on. Next, of course, Justice Putnam will tell you what's going on here, there, and everywhere. Anything I've missed, he'll pick up the slack on next.
NetworksRadio.com.
Well, not anything.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
How about this? Political appointees, as we're speaking about them in the Trump administration, relied on faulty science to justify stripping habitat wildlife protections in the waning days of Trump's term. And the Biden administration will continue FEMA virus aid to the states through the 1st of April. That and much more. Stay tuned for next.